Welcome to the Deep Dive. Glad you could join us. Today we're really getting into the work of, well, a pretty controversial figure sometimes, the German artist Georg Baselitz. We've got some fascinating sources here, a detailed critique, and something quite exciting, an actual interview with the artist himself. So our mission really is to unpack the core arguments around Baselitz, look at some surprising things he said about his own work, and sort of broaden out the conversation. Think about art criticism, creativity, what being a creative artist even means, and we're going to kick things off with something intriguing. Why would a major artist like Baselitz say he was, quote, tired of senseless questions from journalists? It tells us a lot, I think. Then we'll challenge some of his ideas directly, maybe compare his philosophy to someone like Kandinsky, another giant of abstract art.
Absolutely, and it's not just about Baselitz, is it? This deep dive really makes you think about how we all engage with art, how we evaluate it, and maybe most importantly, why that tough, rigorous criticism is actually vital. It's essential for art to keep moving forward, to evolve.
Okay, so let's jump right in. One of the first things that comes up in our sources is this difficulty, the challenge of explaining modern art, especially to people who maybe haven't followed all the twists and turns leading up to figures like Picasso. Our main source's author, Özkan Eroglu, even wrote this cautionary piece back in 2005, Before You Visit the Picasso Exhibition, it was called, just to try and bridge that gap.
Yeah, and connecting that to the bigger picture, the text suggests this problem hasn't really gotten better. Maybe it's even worse now. So it makes you wonder, right, if Baselitz felt even professional journalists were asking, well, senseless questions back in that 2002 interview. What does that mean for you? Just walking into a museum, trying to get a handle on some complex modern art, it's a real hurdle.
Definitely. Now, here's something really interesting the sources point out about Baselitz today. He's described as accepted, now respected, and wrapped in the armor of inviolability. Sounds pretty untouchable. And what's striking is the author couldn't find much, if any, really deep critical analysis of the visual side of his art. The form, the structure, the plastic elements, not just in Germany, his home country, but sort of across the West.
Which immediately begs the question, why? Why this hesitation to really critique him? The source suggests people are, and I'm quoting here, almost afraid of the market created by them. Like they don't want to upset the apple cart, don't want to disturb the existing state. But the author is really strong on this point. Criticism must sow doubt. It must always be there alongside art, because without it, the argument goes, art, like everything else, has lost quality.
That's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? Criticism is a quality control almost. But then how do we figure out an artist's real lasting impact? Well, the sources say maybe we can only really know 100, 150 years after their death. Okay, imagine that. It kind of puts all the current market hype and debates into a different light, doesn't it? A century or more to settle the score. Okay, so bearing that in mind, let's hear from Baselitz himself. This 2002 interview in Istanbul is quite revealing. Apparently, he showed up late as a kind of protest because he was tired of the senseless questions of journalists. Though, he did apologize later once the conversation got more serious, as he put it. And when they asked him straight up, "You're a controversial person, why?" His first reaction was just, "Me." But then he offered something quite, well, introspective. He said, "I am today 64 years old. I have spent 40 years of my life with painting, and am still not satisfied with my paintings. What I do is not enough for me."
That's pretty fascinating, isn't it? This deep dissatisfaction from someone so successful, so acclaimed. It gives you a really different way to look at his work, his whole artistic journey. It's not complacency, that's for sure. It suggests this constant inner striving, maybe.
Yeah, and he kept making these really striking comments. They asked him about exhibitions from way back, 1963, 1970, and he just says, "I always do the same thing. I repeat myself." Very blunt. He also really distanced himself from those early German expressionists, the ones who wanted to change the world. He was clear, "I do not want to change the world. That is not my goal. With me, there is no such thing."
Right.
And he said he doesn't paint with a leitmotif, like a recurring theme, but creates images from a center, from somewhere inside.
It really goes against that common narrative of the artist as, a revolutionary or someone constantly needing to innovate outwardly. His focus seems very internal. The interview also touched on a midlife crisis he went through in the 90s. He talked about grappling with his roots, origins, family, German identity, and even the concept of mortality. He linked all that to the crisis. So that personal struggle definitely provides some context for his art during that period. Adds another layer, you could say.
And he was quite passionate about German painting specifically. The German painting is unique and different, he said. He wrapped that up with his strong statement on authenticity. "This realization has shown me that a person must be himself and remain authentic." His example was Picasso. If Picasso is great, he said, then you absolutely should not paint like Picasso. This is a strict discipline. An artist is not a mere interpreter. Oh shit, we even kind of mused, I would prefer to be a musician instead of a painter. Interesting side note. Okay, but sticking with painting, perhaps the most, well, pivotal statement for our discussion came next. They asked him about improvisation in his painting. His answer, crystal clear. There is no improvisation in painting. Improvisation only exists in music.
And that is a major point of contention,
Yeah.
because Özkan Erolu, the author of our main source, fundamentally disagrees. Erolu argues it was obvious back then, and even more so now, that there is a very strong link between painting and improvisation. It's a direct clash of ideas.
Right, so let's unpack that. Let's bring in Kandinsky, Wassily Kandinsky. Our sources highlight him as someone with a completely opposite view. Kandinsky saw a deep connection between music and painting. He believed a composition in painting can function like a musical composition. And for him, improvisation was the key. It let him express those musical feelings without being tied down to, painting a recognizable object or scene. He thought it accessed deeper layers of consciousness, expressed the subconscious, the inner nature, even spiritual experiences.
Yeah, the text specifically mentions his painting Improvisation 13 from 1910. Kandinsky basically dissolved the forms of the figure in works like that. He wanted to get rid of the story, the narrative ballast, as the source calls it. His goal was the pure effect of color and form. He showed how improvisation and painting could work together, really, completing that idea by 1910. For Kandinsky, abstraction wasn't just a style, it was a liberation from having to represent things literally. It let the art come purely from within.
So when we talk about improvisation in art, what are we actually talking about? Our sources define it pretty clearly. Creating something without prior preparation. It involves spontaneous thinking and acting. Things like acting spontaneously, coming from within, without planning. It's about creativity, developing new ideas on the fly. Also adaptability, dealing with the unexpected, even collaboration, and definitely risk-taking.
Which leads to a really interesting interpretative question, doesn't it? If improvisation is all about breaking rules, adapting, taking risks, could Baselitz's flat-out denial be seen, maybe, as the sources hint, as an artist who doesn't want to leave his comfort zone? Or maybe someone unwilling to destroy his existing system? It suggests a kind of artistic conservatism, perhaps.
Okay, so if Baselitz rejects improvisation, if everything is, as the sources imply, calculated, how does that actually show up in his paintings? What's the effect?
Well, the critique argues his art then lacks that spontaneity, that adaptability, that risk-taking we just talked about. His creative process, described as a push and pull, is seen as very short-lived, and maybe surprisingly, it's claimed it actually hinders thinking. And those famous upside-down figures, the critique links them less to a conscious improvisational breakthrough and more to an unconscious drive. It even points to echoes of Italian Renaissance art, like depictions of St. Peter crucified upside down. So more subconscious influence than spontaneous creation.
And remember what Baselitz himself said. I always do the same thing. I repeat myself. That ties directly into a major criticism from the sources, that his art falls into mannerism and thus into stylization. Meaning, those trademarks, the inverted figures, the specific brushwork, the tilted forms, they become predictable over time. They start looking like repeatable academic presentations, which, the critic argues, really diminish the effect of the work.
Yeah, the key distinction here is repetition versus variation. True variation explores and develops an idea. Repetition just repeats it. The author doesn't pull any punches, saying this state tires and bores the conscious viewer. The worry is that his early, groundbreaking style just hardened into a formula, rather than continuing to lead to genuine discoveries.
The sources make a really important distinction here between stylization and deformation. Think of stylization as that signature move becoming a predictable habit, like Baselitz's inverted figures, perhaps. It limits things. Deformation, on the other hand, is more like, well, Picasso shattering a face and putting it back together differently. It's about wrecking boundaries as boundlessness. And the sources make a strong claim. Stylization can't really connect with the spirit and what they call true creative art.
And the critique doesn't stop there. It also points to a lack of depth in form. The idea is that his focus on a sort of uncertain expressiveness actually gets in the way of developing real depth in form and space. There's also criticism of an overemphasis on gestures, which is said to suffocate his compositions and lead to a loss of control and consistency.
And one final point of critique,
All right.
a conflict between abstraction and figuration. His style is described as this strange hybrid nature A bit academic maybe, but also kind of undecided about going fully non-academic, leading to an unclear result.
Yeah.
The author's final verdict is pretty harsh. There was a great void in his art right from the start, which has only gotten more unpleasant today.
Ouch. Okay, this brings us towards a more philosophical part of the discussion introduced in our sources. It's about the spirit in art. The framework presented is the creator of the universe is the spirit. The creator of art is the creative artist, and the crucial link. The creative artist is unique, sure, but ultimately dependent on the spirit. Right, and the key takeaway here, according to the text, is that understanding this whole philosophy of the spirit and spirituality is the only prerequisite to understand the creative artist and art. It's fundamental. The text then lays out 3 levels. You've got the hand worker, the craftsman, who basically works within tradition, within the spatial circles of the past. Then the artist, who might push towards the past but doesn't quite break through to the future. But the creative artist, that's the highest level. They reach both past and future spatial circles, making everything connect, making it work like clockwork.
So the truly great artists, the creative ones, aren't just skilled. They tap into something deeper, this spirit, which lets them bridge time, speak across generations. That's quite a concept. This spirit is what enables them to go beyond their own time and open new perspectives for everyone else.
Exactly. And building on that, the sources bring up Gesamtkunstwerk, Wagner's idea of the total work of art. Kandinsky found the visual art equivalent, but now the idea has evolved into Gesamtkunstwahrnehmung, maybe total art perception. It means really understanding art by seeing its connections everywhere to literature, philosophy, history, you name it. It's about seeing the whole picture.
Okay, so how does this apply to Baselitz? To see it in action, the sources suggest a comparison. Baselitz versus another big German contemporary, Anselm Kiefer. The argument is that Baselitz, by saying in that interview he's not theoretical, he kind of automatically separates art from the spirit, which is seen as exactly the opposite of what Kiefer does, with all the history and philosophy woven into his work. And because of this perceived lack in Baselitz's approach, the critique suggests his big monumental works aiming for sublimity end up feeling more like just a psychological reflection, or even a whim, not truly profound. Wow, okay, so after diving into all that Baselitz's own words, the pointed criticism, the philosophical frameworks, what does this mean for us? For you, the listener, when you encounter art, this deep dive really surfaces some key tensions, doesn't it? The artist's view versus the critics, the market's power versus genuine artistic progress, the calculated approach versus, well, spontaneous creation.
Yeah, and connecting back to that idea of criticism, source material really hammers this point home. It argues that when you don't have enough rigorous plastic criticism focused on the actual form of the art, then the plastic realities, the art itself, and the market realities get tangled up. This creates potentially a chain of errors linked to the entire history of art. It's a big claim. The suggestion is that if Baselitz had faced more of this kind of critique earlier on, maybe we'd have seen a completely different Baselitz art and a completely different Baselitz market. Food for thought.
It really is. And it leads to a pretty direct question for you, listening right now. In a world where market success can sometimes make an artist seem unassailable, how do you keep your own critical eye sharp? How do you tell the difference between real creative development and what these sources are calling repetition and stylization? It's not always easy. And maybe we can end on this final thought from the sources, a provocative one. The artist's creative state, sincere or insincere, is always revealed in their art for those who can see it. That really puts the onus back on us, doesn't it? To look closely, to question, to engage actively. So what are you looking for when you stand in front of a piece of art? And maybe how has digging into Baselitz today shifted that perspective, even just a little bit?